I was started in extension about 17 years ago, people would come to us and say, I want some native plants and I want them to be no maintenance. And so that's where we were coming from still. I'm still repeating that they're not no maintenance, they're low maintenance. And in general, if you choose native plants correctly and carefully, they don't require as much pruning. They don't require fertilization, no soil amendments unless there's unusual circumstances in the soil, like highly acidic soil or high pH or severe compaction from vehicular traffic. They could take infrequent or no mowing and no disease or insect management other than some scouting for cultural problems or sanitation purposes. So if nothing's eating that garden, it's not really an ecosystem, but they do require maintenance. And I think we have evolved to this point in our time where we don't say that anymore, that they don't need any. So this is just a comparison of turf grass, the costs, because we hear that a lot. And it does come down to cost a lot. Everybody's got a budget, whether it be time, energy, or money. So turf grass installation, and these are old numbers, but I did compare them with recent costs. And if anything, it's more. So turf grass installation, sod or seeding, can cost $4,000 to $8,000 per acre. And the maintenance, and these are current from my small survey, was about $1,000 a year for a quarter-acre lot, which is what is very common in our area. And turf grass mowing is about $100 to $130 a mow. So I decided that when my youngest left for college, I wasn't going to mow anymore. So I don't. And native grasses and perennials, they're not cheap. And particularly now, they're a really popular thing to be talking about. So, and some of the prices have gone up, and sometimes they're not readily available, the ones that you want. But about $2,000 to $4,000 per acre, I think that's probably on the low end. But they are there, and they don't need the additional maintenance costs. So using advanced planning is really important. And first off, you need to decide, how tidy does this need to be? Do you live in an HOA? Do you have a free and easy neighborhood like mine? Evaluate how much work you're willing to do and whether you can hire somebody or whether you can delegate it to your son or daughter or cousin or uncle. And consider before you go to the garden center, whether a plant is going to add to your maintenance or reduce your maintenance or keep it the same before you go to the garden center. Keep reassessing, keep editing, keep taking pictures and notes and evaluating whether your maintenance is too much, whether your landscape design is taking too much out of you, and think of ways you can modify it. Prioritize some seasonal maintenance tasks and then select your goals. My goals are aesthetics, habitat, and I evaluate that constantly. So there's a bunch of terms that people throw around, and I'm just going to define those right off the bat. So naturalistic planting, this is the High Line. It's a naturalistic planting in New York City along the railroad, designed by Piet Ondorff, a Dutch designer, and it emulates nature. It's supposed to look like people haven't really touched it or even planned it, that it just kind of evolved. But that's not true. It took a lot of planning. The plants were selected really carefully, and it does require some inputs. For example, we experience succession. There's going to be woody material growing up in a meadow area, and that has to be removed. Invasives are always moving in. But that's the term naturalistic planting, and I'm kind of coming from that framework. So sustainable refers to a place or action that doesn't put a big burden on the whole and doesn't drain our resources unduly. And the energy and resources is used at a rate that they're being restored. And that includes my energy too in taking care of my garden. And as I get older and as I consult with clients, they might need it to be changed around so we can protect our bodies and not do quite so much. I mean, I had 2 hip replacements, and I'm really hoping I can keep my knees. So that's a really real problem. So this is a Chicago house that probably has rainwater collection, and it has impervious pavers in there, and a little meadow area. So that's sustainable. So adaptive management is where I'm coming from, and because I don't know all the answers, and I bet you don't either. And adaptive management lets us not know the answers, but change as we determine the answers or as we see things evolve. And that's all adaptive. It's a natural resource professional's terminology, but I think it really fits what I'm doing. And when I look at my landscape, I can make better decisions based on sort of what's happening. There's the definition by the Cornell Botanical Garden. So do you have a formal garden, or do you have an HOA that has strict rules? I know a lot of us are in that situation, and the borders have to be tidy, and the plants can't flop over all the time. And there have to be walkways, and those walkways have to be clear of vegetation that doesn't have any snakes or insects or bees in it, we have to live in that community. And so some of our landscaping needs to be carefully chosen to meet those needs, to be acceptable. And some native plants are floppy. And some of them are aggressive. So we need to pick them carefully. So I'm going to define a traditional landscape versus an adaptive landscape. So in traditional landscapes, start and end with the plan. Somebody designs the plan, and that plan goes in, and that's the plan that comes out at the end. But that's not how plants act. It may not take into account all the site specifics. And the maintenance tends to be, in May we do this, in June we do this, all the way through the year, and it's unchanging, and it's static. And the plant communities are stable, and monocultures tend to be more common. And monocultures just think, if something affects one plant in a row, then it's going to affect all the plants in a row. So I'm not obviously coming from that frame of mind. I'm coming from an adaptive landscape frame of mind. And it's looking at my landscape as a dynamic, changing ecosystem. The landscape plan is just the starting point. Adrian over here does native plant landscape plans. And that's just the beginning, because you're always evaluating and changing and questioning and learning. And it takes good communication between the parties involved. So if you're having somebody else do it, I'm going to give you some tips for communicating better. And each plant is functioning as a part of the whole. So the first concept I want you to consider is a reference landscape. Now, our urban, suburban soils have been turned upside down, stripped of all their organic matter. Trucks have run over them and compacted it. So they're not like a natural area near us. But we talked about this in the Meadows class, picking a plant community that kind of goes with a natural area that's near you. And that might be Occoquan Bay, out in the East Coast in the east of Prince William, or it could be Prince William Forest Park, or it could be the battlefield, more natural areas. It could be Bull Run Mountain area. But picking an area so you can determine what kind of plant communities. So I live in Manassas. I live in a neighborhood, and I'm on a floodplain off of Bull Run. I have a mesic forest, which is really dry, oak and hickory, and acidic soil. But I can look that up on a couple of great resources, and I can figure out what plant communities like that soil, like the topography, and remember, there's geology below that it depends on. So here's our state of Virginia, and we're in the Piedmont and the coastal plain. So this is this shows you where the fault line is. But Prince William County, and if you're in the Meadows class, this is in there too. We're divided into two physiographic regions, the Piedmont and the coastal. And there's a transition zone right in between. So if you're east of 95, you're in the coastal zone, and you have a slightly different, I think you're 7B. And if you're to the west of 95, then you're in the Piedmont. Okay, so there are different soils, there's different geology, there's different topography, and all you have to do is do some site visits at both sides of the county to see that. So 80% of Prince William, though, is in the Piedmont. So we can use that to help us find our reference community. And you can look at this DCR site and it describes different plant communities. And you can kind of see, okay, where would mine be? Even though I have a suburban lot that doesn't have many trees around it, I'm not in a forest, you can kind of find a group of plants because plants like to live in community, just like us. So you can look on that and get some information about that. So a Piedmont meadow has these plants in it. A little blue stem, Indian grass. You can see both of those at the battlefield, plume goldenrod, and narrowleaf mountain mint. Okay, so if you wanted to have a natural kind of small meadow or a large meadow, these would be really good ones to add. And Ursanga is an excellent resource in Springfield. And they have a compendium that's organized by full sun, wet, dry. But in addition to that, they've organized it according to plant community, which is really, really helpful. Matt Bright has done a fabulous job with this. So use this online resource. And then you can shop at Ursanga too, because they're a great nonprofit. But these are the high value generals plants that you can't go wrong with in the Piedmont. And so he has a list of those too. So I just picked the full sun, mesic, medium to dry, moisture. So that's sort of my front yard. My backyard is more of silty, kind of floodplainish, okay, and more wooded. Okay, so just, I know that seems like a lot to know, but just peruse these sites to think about what you can do to make better choices. So, and think about layers. This is Lee Pickering's wonderful resource, and Plant Nova Natives uses this resource, and Audubon ambassadors in our county use it. Think of it in terms of the layers. You know, you've heard some about trees, and this will reduce your maintenance to have the layers that are needed for habitat for the critters that we want to support, but also for your back. This is another one. The guy talked to the guy from this permaculture site and asked if I could use this. I thought it was really great, going from bare rock to a mature forest. And think about where your property is in that. Most likely it's not a mature forest. Although some of you, there's not many mature forests in Prince William. Or any? Yeah, a few. So you're going to layer your plants for lower maintenance. So this is the healing garden that Master Gardeners and I designed and put in with Josh Yetter Clark. And this is at Innova UVA Prince William. And it's right in front, so it had to look tidy. And this is when we first put it in. So there's a lot of brown places, a lot of mulch in there, but we used all native plants and we used layering. And if you go back there now, I'm not maintaining it now. I just want to say that caveat, but it had enough layering so that it would be lower maintenance for the crew.
Where was that installed?
4 years ago. Okay. So let's talk about, this is the theoretical part. So just stay with me on this. This is going to be the key to not overworking yourself, because I didn't do this. So I'm going to assume that your goals are similar to mine. We want to avoid a lot of maintenance. Is that right? Okay, good. We want to plan for long-term. We don't have to take plants out and replace them, right? We want to accommodate the interaction of those plants with the ecology, with the insects. And we want to consider the processes that are occurring. Can we agree on those? Okay. First, we're going to talk about roots. Now, when you go to the garden center, you're not looking at roots. You're looking at, oh man, look at that bloom. And isn't that pretty? And I want like 6 of those, but I'm going to caution you to look at the roots first, because they are the key to persistence, longevity, building a matrix, and how they spread and how they act. So this is a taproot, and trees have a taproot, some of them for a while, and then it loses that, and sometimes the nursery cuts the taproot off. But this is how kind of a taproot works. It kind of just goes down and has some side roots on it, okay? But this is a rhizomatous or stoloniferous root. And these drawings are done by a botanist in Poland. And I can only say her first name, Fortunata. but I'm taking some classes from Nigel Dunnett and Noel Kingsbury, and they're British designers. And they designed the meadow around the moat at the Queen's Jubilee, Golden Jubilee in England. And he's teaching this class on the, and roots are the key to everything. They spread quickly, they give longevity, they form a matrix. Sometimes they're a problem, but so this is just another picture of the rhizomes. So rhizomes, all they are underground stems. And stolons, think of strawberries, they're just above ground stems, okay? And so here's a couple other pictures. And so these root structures I'll be referring to, there's corms and there's tubers and there's bulbs and there's the rhizomes and the stolons and just some other terminology. You don't have to know the right words, but just start observing the plants in your yard and how they're acting under the ground. So this is let's go back. This is clonality. This is how it clones itself. They're identical plants. It's asexual. But this is sexual reproduction. I mean, it's a generalized drawing, but and it has shorter lifespan. If you have one plant with just those roots going down there, that's going to be a shorter lived plant, and it's not going to interact as well with the other plants building a matrix. And this is called non-clonal. Okay, so plants with a single root and much more top growth tend to be more short-lived. And I know there probably will be qualms with these, but this is what I found, and this is the ones that I've found from research. So heuchera is like that, has a lot of top growth, has all those fibrous roots growing down, but it tends to be more short-lived. And they're doing okay at the Novant garden, but if I wanted a long-term planting, I probably wouldn't choose something that had that plant's root structure. So this is another one. The blanket flower is similar too. We wonder why some plants don't last as long, or I hear the term short-lived perennial. And so if you hear that, question it, and then look at the roots. So making wise predictions, these are shade plants. And these plants in my woodland garden have done fabulous because they're sending out those rhizomes. They're building a community. They're probably talking together like trees do, I'm pretty sure. And then so you have the Geranium maculatum, nice drift. I mean, nothing's going to get in. The weeds are not going to have a chance with that kind of matrix. And then you have the Eurybia divaricata, the woodland aster, same thing. They are, and so I'm going to show you this matrix in my yard. So this was taken last spring, and I moved away the leaves. Okay, so I do leave my leaves. And you do see a lot of bare spots, but this is early spring. So you have a maidenhair fern, and you have two types of violets, a cream violet and the regular violet sororia, and the columbine. There's a golden ragwort in there and some bluebells over on the side you can barely see, and the woodland aster. And those plants are working together in a community. And the more they fill in there, the less weeding I have to do, the less stilt grass that comes in. So these are some sad winter matrices that I took a couple weeks ago. And again, I moved away the leaves in my front yard. The arrow is pointing to fleabane, why can't I think of that? I said it all last class. Erigeron, annuus, fleabane. So it's already sent its seeds out last year, and it's already popping up all over my yard. And these are full sun. Okay, so and there's no, it's the Carolina geranium. I'm getting old. And some people consider that a weed, but it's a native plant, so it's taken up space where a weed could go. And then we have spiderwort, and there is some asters. I think that might be the frost asters, but they send out lots of rhizomes. And then there's the Rudbeckia, and then there's the Zizia. And that's a pretty cool matrix for the full sun. So these plants form a very deep matrix, like a very deep root system, and they need to be put in before they have a lot of competition. Okay, they're more like subshrubs. There's Baptisia and Amsonia and goat's beard, the Aruncus. and Culver's roots. So they form but they need to be established well before they have to compete. So if you're planting a garden, you could put these in first and let them establish themselves before you introduce competition. These are long-lived perennials though, and they act like shrubs. So as I get older, I'm adding more things that act like shrubs because they take up more space and I have less energy to deal with them. So this is a meadow that is not native. It's in Vienna, Austria. And I think it's brilliant. It shows a matrix of plants, and just forget that those aren't native to Virginia. I don't even know if they're native. I don't think they're native to Vienna either. But they've created a tapestry. There's very little upkeep on this. I mean, it's amazing. And the thing is, they've recreated this throughout the city of Vienna, on traffic islands, on health strips, on just all over the city, this exact same plants. And it's not boring. It brings continuity. And they found plants that work together and are compatible. So that's what we're aiming for with native plants. So this, again, my yard, not quite as beautiful as that, but I love it. So I'm going to show you, this is a full sun matrix. This is fleabane and spiderwort and coreopsis. And there's some non-native irises because I have a few non-natives, but 80% native, I would say. And there's some Monardo at the back. And those are working pretty well together for the moment anyway. And then there's this. This is not my garden. This is a Dutch designer, but he gives you that same feeling of developing plants that like each other, that do well together, that are attractive. And his work is just gorgeous. And you can see the repetition. He's not using a great variety of plants. He's using the same plants in a repeating fashion and forming the matrix. This is Spencer Williams, and he's at our teaching garden here. And not every plant in this picture is native either, but he has created, we want to teach people at our teaching garden that maintenance can be sustainable, that people you can do this. We want to teach people to garden. And he has put together this group of plants that reduces his maintenance by incorporating, he has a number of natives, the spigelia and the coreopsis is there. He has some nepeta in there. So again, I'm not a purist, but I'm just trying to get the concept across to you. So the way we're going to go about this is we're going to talk about plant strategies. And Grimes came up with plant strategies in 1977. And I credit Karen Rexroad. If you know her, she's wonderful. And she taught me this 17 years ago. And doggone it, I've been trying to apply it ever since. So I'm hoping you're going to benefit from this. But there are 3 plant strategies: competitors, stress tolerators, also called stress avoiders, rudderals or pioneers. Okay, so we're going to go for each of them. So this is the Grimes triangle, and rudderals do not like to be disturbed, and they do not like competition. Competitors use up all the resources. They don't like stress. But they can handle some disturbance. Stress tolerators can usually have a storage structure so that they can withstand bad conditions to come back when it's better. Okay, I'll show you some examples. So disturbance, we know what disturbance is now, right? Okay, stress, too much water, not enough water, cold, extreme temperatures, snow next week, 68 today, shifts in salinity or pH changes, those are all stresses, okay? Competition, neighboring plants, taking up the nutrients, taking up the sun, taking up the water, taking up space. So stress and disturbance are the 2 main factors limiting plant material in a habitat. So in some ways, stress can be good and help us with maintenance. Because, well, I'll show you later. But this is a college professor did Grimes triangle, and he had his students who had gardens at home try to put their plants on the continuum and to see where they might fall in terms of how much stress they can take, how competitive they are. And here's an example of a competitor. This is Rebecca Lancelot. If anybody who works at the teaching garden knows that this is like really a competitor. So their motto is be big, take up space. And we're all nodding. We all have one of these, right? And so the competition is taking place above the ground and below the ground. Uses up a lot of resources. It grows where it's unstable conditions, and then if it's attacked by a disease or low resources, it sends out the runners. Long way. Goldenrod, Solidaga rugosa. Think about how long those runners are. And if I chop one down, it's going to send out more runners to survive. And competitors can really do a good job. I mean, they can be good, except for my whole front yard is all competitors at what was all competitors at one point. And I was working myself to death trying to manage them. So that's what you're going to avoid. So here's some other competitors: Joe Pye, Monarda, common milkweed, Culver's root or Veranda castrum. So beautiful plants have their place, take up space, send out runners, send out large fleshy leaves. Here's a few other competitors. These are shades. So anybody who has ostrich ferns knows that they have a lot to share. And then there's the white snake root, and that's a good shade competitor also for the same root reasons. We're thinking about the roots here. The blooms are beautiful. The blooms are important, but we're thinking about the roots. So competitors, again, be big, take up space, spread, cover the area. Do we know any weeds like that? So here's two competitors in my yard duking it out. So there's the Solidaga rugosa, and then there's the New England aster, and but they're doing okay. But if I introduced a third or a fourth, I might have to do a little bit of intervention. So let's define rudderel. Rudderel are the pioneers. They arrive first at the party, and they're the opportunists and the generalists. So this is Pussy Toes, this picture here, and the first time I saw Pussy Toes and I identified it, it was growing in a church parking lot with gravel and sand, compaction, and it was all over the place. And it was like, I'm here, nobody else is here, I'm going to establish myself. And it's sort of short-lived, but rudderels send out a lot of seeds. And here's some other rudderels. Columbine doesn't live that long, but boy, does it seed heavily, doesn't it? Especially this one. Anopheros fruticosa, the evening primrose, rudbeckias, some of the asters, and zizia. Zizia, as long as I keep the weeds away from zizia, it's just going to take over the whole area. And so that has its place too. But there are times of the year when it's bare. Because the seeds are not germinating, or, it's winter. So here's the rudderels again. They arrive at the party. They might be a little weedy. There might be too many of them. They're easy to pluck out. They're short-lived. So here's some stress tolerators. Did I skip one? No. Okay. So trout lilies. This is a stand of trout lilies at my house. And they have a really great root system. You can see they're competitive with each other, but nothing else goes in there. And so their root structure is storage, and they can store things. So when the conditions are not good, they can still continue to grow. Some ferns are stress tolerators. This Tiarella is a stress tolerator, and the root system it's more fibrous, less rhizomatous. And then there's the common blue violet, and think about the root of a common blue violet. I mean, I took a hunk out of my garden the other day, and they're definitely a stress tolerator. If I can they do not like competition though. So if the ground ivy comes in on this particular planting, if I can take the ground ivy out, then the violets will just fill in that area because they have that storage structure in them. Okay, so now we know some plant strategies. This is just a review. They're used on green roofs a lot. So this is Sedum ternatum, and they're slow to grow. Okay, they have fleshy leaves. Sometimes they're evergreen, and they maximize whatever resources they can find. And this is the characteristic stress tolerator. This is one tough plant. It looks so delicate, but it has the green and purple leaves right now. It's penstemon, beard tongue. Okay, tough plant. You can plant this on a median. You could plant this by a salty road, and it has those it can handle that stress. So it thrives in high stress areas, but it cannot take disturbance. It does not like to be disturbed. Okay. So just to sum up those three, I hope you're not totally overwhelmed. Rudderals naturalize by sending out seeds. Stress avoiders avoid and store up in their roots, and competitors invade. So those are the three personalities, but mainly an ecological strategy for survival. So this is my yard as it is, and I have almost all competitors in there. And it was honestly killing me. I had a nice matrix, but I was always having to clear out things that were, climbing on each other, and there was more disease because they were so packed together. And here's a couple other. What do you see here? You see Joe Pye, which is a competitor. The Rebecca is a rudderal. And then this is Helianthus here, and that's another competitor. And then Partridge Pea and some Echinacea. But so you're going to help me solve this problem, but let's just talk about this Grimes paradox for just a minute. So remember how I said stress limits the plant growth? So we don't really ever think about wanting to stress a plant, but sometimes if we want other things to coexist with it, we might need to. So stressful conditions actually are easier to manage. And when the competitors dominate, you don't have as much diversity. And that's what I'm looking for in my yard. I'm looking for a naturalistic planting that has a lot of diversity, a lot of different plant shapes and colors and bloom times. And disturbed environments can create space for those rudderals and stress avoiders to thrive. Okay. So editing and just observing, you don't have to know if a plant's a rudderal. You don't have to go home and study this. All you have to do is look at what is its strategy? And start thinking in terms of your landscape as being living, and how can those roots do a better job, or what would be better here? It's food for thought rather than the answers. Okay, I'm not going to solve all your. So this is my front yard, one part of my front yard. Look at all these competitors I have. You can see why I needed 2 hip replacements. And here's the rudderals that I have. And this is my new favorite, common cinquefoil. Ursanga sells it. They're the only ones that sell it. I'll show you a picture in a minute. And then there's the stress avoiders. And so what do I need? What would you do if you were me?
Fewer competitors, more stress avoiders.
Less competitors, more stress avoiders. Yep. So here's a matrix for sun. And here's a matrix for shade that has a nice balance of these. That doesn't mean I can just give up on the editing and looking and photographing, but this might give me a running chance at being able to maintain my garden. So invasive plants, they're always going to be with us. And many of them are competitors, and many of them are pioneers sending out tons of seed. So management is inevitable. You're just going to always have to be scouting for invasives. That's just never going to end, unfortunately. We have little natural succession in urban soils and urban neighborhoods, suburban neighborhoods. Any succession is usually an invasive moving in. So just beware. And garlic mustard's out. So be scouting now before it takes hold. So I just got these. I'm managing a couple landscapes for friends, and herbicide is necessary. I'm a purist about this, but there is no other way to manage invasives without some use of herbicide. So these allow me to make a cut during the growing season and apply it with a sponge applicator. The proper amount, tiny bit, only goes in the plant. And so and there's also, you can get one with a longer handle. So that's just my advice. So let's talk about specific maintenance practices for a bunch of different, and these are kind of brief because I want you to take home the theoretical and do some thinking about it. So in general, disturb the soil as little as possible. Choose your plants carefully. Don't go to the garden center without a plant. Not that I haven't done that. Let debris build your soil. Get the weeds early. The bitter cress is already flowering. Mulch or use a ground cover, no bare soil. And shrubs, I'm starting to put in shrubs in some of my meadow because I just can't keep up with it. I'm getting old and nobody's getting younger, okay? And so you want to shade out and form those matrices to compete with weeds. Let's talk about meadows. If you're in my meadows class, this is brief compared to that, but you can see the meadows class on the recording. And site preparation is really important, getting rid of the competing vegetation, having realistic expectations and choosing the right seed mix or plants, getting out the woodies and getting out the invasives. And the mowing, I started recommending mowing, or you can't burn really regular, very often in our society, but mowing or cutting 1/3 of it and leaving 2/3 of the stems as long as possible. So that will allow me to manage some of it if I need to add new plants or something like that. And then the next year do another 1/3. Okay, that seems to be a good compromise. And again, leave the stems. The 50-degree rule, people talk about, don't cut the stems till it's 50 degrees regularly in the daytime and at night. Well, we've had 50 degrees for weeks, haven't we? And Doug telling me says that's an urban myth. He said, just leave them as long as you can, because sometimes these insects are in there longer than, a few months or 6 months or 9 months. Sometimes they need longer. So the stems will fall when they're done. So here's a couple ways for a meadow. We talked about this in the meadow class. A couple ways to prepare the soil without using herbicide. Solarization is in summer for about 4 weeks. Water it well, tack it down on the edges. Wait 4 weeks, pull it back, see if it's cooked. And that's a short-term summer. This is what you could do right now. Occultation, it's just using a black, and you're pinning it down with landscape staples on the edges. And, I think some soil organisms might have been harmed with this, but I pulled it back and there were like 3 DeKay's brown snakes, 1 ringneck snake, and about 2 or 3 garter snakes under there. So they were sincerely, happily eating the beetles and stuff that were around there. It created a new habitat for them. Anyway, so those are techniques for preparing the soil for a meadow or herbicide. And, that's a longer discussion. So in the fall, maintaining a meadow, avoid mowing again. Assess your coverage in the fall. Make sure that, you don't have a lot of bare spots that will get weeds. In the winter, scout for invasives and weeds. Leave the seed heads, of course, for good food forage for the birds. And it shades out the competitors. And it's beautiful. Take a look at Heather Holmes' book on wasps. Wasps have a bad name, but they are incredibly important. And her book is wonderful. And she has some landscape plans in there for you to plant from wasps. And they're so incredibly interesting. And think of leaves as a resource like water. That's a quote from Doug Tallamy. I leave 4 inches. If it's 4 inches or more, I'll pull it back for some spring ephemerals. But if it's like 2 to 3 inches of leaves, I just leave them and they all come up through that. There's enough air circulation and germination that weed seeds don't germinate quite as much. But there are 4,000 species of native bees, and 70% of them nest in bare ground. So if you have a little area that you can leave bare, I have one hillside that they always nest in, and 30% of those use stems. So leaving the stems is really important. In meadow in the summer, too hot to do anything. Walk around with a lemonade or a glass of wine and just enjoy the meadow, observe, take photos. Avoid mowing. It stresses plants. You might want to remove some woodies. Do that in the fall. It's too hot to do in the summer around here. A bioswale, that's just like a ditch garden. But it has water coming in and water going out or being absorbed. Okay, so it's sort of like a rain garden, but it moves the water through it. And it's just like a garden. I mean, it needs weeding. You need to make sure the inlet and the outlet are clear and able to have the water flow through it, that it's not clogged with a lot of sedimentation at the root level that would cause disease in the plants. So if it has standing water for more than 48 hours, then you need to investigate, clearing out some of the sediment, making sure that the drains are working correctly. So a rain garden, this is one we put in at Westminster at Lake Ridge a few years ago, and Master Gardeners put it in, designed by me and Josh Clark, and it's a garden. You're going to weed it. You're going to make sure the mulch hasn't moved. And if the mulch has moved in a certain way, that's going to tell you how the water's flowing. And is the water flowing in? Is it flowing out? Are the drains clogged? If there are drains, do you need to replace plants? Do they need pruning? Is there dead stuff on there? You can prune out dead stuff anytime. So expect it to grow and get bigger and cover more area in time. So rain garden maintenance, this is just the schematic that shows you the inlet or outlet. If you're not, there's a lot of great literature online about rain gardens and maintenance, and Chesapeake Bay landscape professionals can help with, checking it out to make sure that it's working correctly for you, especially if you have gotten funding through VCAP or another funding cost share program. You might need to verify that it's working correctly, and you might have to have an inspector come out for that. So a small pollinator garden, it's just a garden, okay? Plants need about 1/2 inch a week, and they need native plants need to be established with good irrigation for the first year, usually, sometimes the first 2 years. In the fall, you can collect seeds from it or leave some seeds. Collect the seeds from the ones you don't quite want as many of. And then in the winter, leave the stems. In the spring, if it's kind of falling over, you can do a Chelsea chop in May. And that's from the Chelsea Flower Show. You just cut like 1/3 of it off the top. Make sure you water it well and it's not stressed first. Because I told someone, a master gardener at Chelsea Choppers, and she hadn't been watering it and the plants died. So don't do that. Okay. Chelsea Chop works really well to keep those floppy perennials from falling over into the walkway. Woody plants. You've had some great speakers on woody plants today, but make sure you pick plant for the right size, the mature size of the plant before you put it in. You can prune the 3Ds, disease, dead, damaged, deranged, any of those at any time of year. And time, you can consult Extension or Help Desk, Master Gardener at pwcgov.org. You can call us. We'll send you the pruning calendars, or you can find Virginia Tech's resources online. Add a shrub or two if you want to reduce maintenance. They're taking up real estate. Okay, they're taking up space that you don't have to weed as much. Native bees use pithy and wood. Okay, so I've been leaving more wood in my yard for that purpose. We used to say prune out all the dead, but maybe you could prune out the dead and stand it up against the fence for beneficials to use. I've been recommending this to HOAs. Have an island of trees. The trees want to communicate together. They want to be in a community too. And the weed whacker won't get them so easily if they're all together. It's easier to mow around them. It's just a better practice. So there's the bittercress. Know your weeds. Know your weeds versus your new seedlings. Weed control. I use chip drop a lot, and I got my grandson to help me with that. We did a lot of mulching when he was here. But you can read research about wood chips. We used to think that, fresh wood chips took the nitrogen out of the soil. But Linda Chalker-Scott at University of Washington, she has debunked that myth. So you can read more about her there. Just Google wood chip research and chip drop. You can Google that and it's a very large load like that. It's taller than my car, but the wood chips help me if I'm If I can't get to a planting, but I cleared it out, I could put the wood chips down and just hold that space open for me. And it's 4 or 5 inches, and then they cook down pretty rapidly. So they're a good mulch, and I have a large property and not as much money as I'd like. And so they're free. So irrigation, figure out zones in your yard. Like on Mondays, this is the zone I do. I will hand water it, don't overhead water, that causes disease. Water the soil level. Figure out a routine for watering because we have a lot of drought. We've been having drought every year since 2000, I think, or maybe longer. And so make sure that you're giving your plants, especially newly established plants, enough water. Sanitation, scout your garden regularly. Know it's normal and cut things out, clean your pruners, throw it out, don't compost it. If you see anything that looks like disease, you can email us and we can tell you what it is. But likely what we're going to say to do is sanitation. Okay, just clean it up and throw it out and get. So I go through my meadow, and if I see funky looking leaves on the bottom of some of my Rebeckias, I'll pull that old Rebeckia out and give it more airspace in there. So disease material, again, don't compost it, clean your pruners, contact us if you have questions. And every year I have people going, something ate all my dill or something ate all my parsley. And I'm like, yay. but you know what? That's why we plant it, but it's a whole mind shift. You know, our neighbors don't always know this. So be kind. So salt management, we haven't had much of that this summer. I have a ton of salt usually on my roadway. I have salt tolerant things planted along my roadway. And these are some of the things that do really, really well with salt. But you can find others at Extension Publications for Pennsylvania. And I sweep mine up and I use it again if I need to. And so, I mean, it's so much salt. So it's not good. It makes plants dry out. Native grasses, you know, you can cut them when the spring growth is coming. This is Eragrostis, purple lovegrass, wonderful native, shorter native grass, not real aggressive. Cut it back when the new growth is occurring, but leave those seed heads all winter. This is the maintenance checklist that we use for Chesapeake Bay landscape professionals. And whenever I put in a new garden in my work now or with a client, I'll fill this out because I want to be accountable and I want them to know, I want to communicate to the owner that this is what you can do and this is when you should do it. So, okay, thanks. I'm good. So anyway, this is just, here it is filled out, you know, just some things to do and it helps to communicate. So if you're going to have, I'm sorry, do you want to go back? Did you want that? This, you can also view this all again. Okay. So if you're hiring somebody, you give them this checklist. Okay. And you monitor their work because a lot of people are not versed in handling native plant maintenance. They don't know what to do. They're doing the old landscape plan. Put it in, it should look exactly the same. It's not that anymore. So applying the plant strategies that you learned, observe. You don't have to know rod roll. You don't have to know stress avoider. All you have to do is observe how that plant is growing and what will create a matrix. Clump formers will break up over time like Monarda. They don't like a lot of competition. So these are just the things to remember. Plant densely. Sum it up. These are some resources. That's repetition. And this is Pete Ondoff's Lurie Garden. He does not use exclusively natives, but I think his matrices are beautiful. Anyway, I'm ready for questions. No question. Oh, Larry Weiner also has some designs online, and Doug Tallamy has some designs online too. Yes.
When you talked about mowing, or since we can't burn a third annually, help me out. Is that if I've got clumps of masses of plants, do I cut back a third of each mass? Do I cut back a third of my garden? What does that mean?
So if that's for a meadow, yeah. So I had some disease stuff in my yard, so I cut it all the way back. But all my other stems are still up. And they're going to be up as long as they need to be, until they fall over.
So that a third a year is for a meadow.
That's for a meadow, right? And for a meadow, I do mine by hand because I want to see what's going on in there. But you can also use a weed whacker, you know, I mean, depending on how big the meadow is.
We have a question in the chat box.
Mhm.
Where can I find a list of competitors, plant lists, competitors, runners, and stress tolerance?
Well, you can Google, it's hard to find. It's not nice and neat. Grimes didn't do that for us. But you can look at this presentation, has a lot of it. So you can review this presentation, the recording and online. You can certainly Google Grimes triangle. But Noel Kingsbury also has a paper online on naturalistic planting. And he has taken the Grimes triangle and he is applying it now. Of course, he's in England. So I have to like convert everything, you know, well, I don't know that plant. So it's not nice and easy, but I think this resource would probably be your best bet. Because that list I gave you, it had stress of an S, it had a C, it has an R. So you can use those matrices.
Another chat question. They want to know why overhead watering is bad. That's as close to mimicking rain as it gets.
I hear that all the time. Yeah, but we can't control that. We can control how we water plants. And when you overhead water, that wets the leaves. The leaves stay wet, especially in our summers with the humidity. And then it gets leaf spot and disease, fungal issues. And so we know, especially like tomatoes, water everything at the soil line. Okay. And I water it by hand because I know how much it's getting then. And I don't have the money to put it through an irrigation system. Yeah. Go ahead.
Time's up.
Go ahead. Quick.
You have like 5-6 acres of mowing grass, things with something. What would you recommend? Is it meadow? What type of plant? But this is for large.
This is too big a question for now, but where do you live? In Prince William? I would say contact our extension office, the Master Gardener address, and see if you can arrange for a site visit. We don't do site visits everywhere, but our soil and water, if it's in ag, is it ag?
Yeah.
Oh, start with Soil and Water Conservation District. That would be the best bet. Okay, thank you so much for your attention.